Hello world, Christian Truther here, and I've got a really exciting video for you today. I'm so excited because we're going to really take a sledgehammer to one of these arguments. But before I get into it, this is part 6 of my multi-part series on what is the shape of the world. Because there is a true shape to the world, and it's true regardless of what we think about it. So we're trying to see, can we determine objectively what that truth is, and hold on to it. Now, before I get into this video any further, these are my ground rules. The top 2 are my promise to you, and the bottom 2 are the ones that I want to hold you guys accountable to in the comment section. Let's treat each other with the respect we deserve as human beings. As always, no scripts, no green screens or cuts, because I'm not looking for polish to try and improve my arguments. And lastly, if you haven't watched my first video on this subject, I do recommend doing that because I go over why I'm even doing it and what my methodology is going to be. I do tackle a different topic, but the main reason to watch that video at this point is probably the why, because this video stands on itself. We're going to aim the arguments at each other on this subject, and we're going to fire, but one side is really going to get decimated. But before I get into it, and I'm calling it, by the way, plain nonsense, because we're talking about airplanes and flights and stuff like that. So something we have to understand about economics, actually 2 somethings. The first is the concept that regardless of how you believe it happened or why or anything like that, then what's known as the Northern Hemisphere and the round Earth model, and what's closer to the center of the map, that's where the bulk of the world's wealth has been accumulated. North America, Asia, and Europe. And we understand that flights are a luxury ticket item for most people. I understand some people do it for business, but for most people it's a luxury item. And so therefore, we have to understand that the flights would be more prevalent towards the center of the flat Earth map or in the Northern Hemisphere for the round Earth map. And that leads to a second concept, which is called economies of scale. And the big key word there is bulk and bulk pricing. So if you're not familiar with those concepts, go ahead and take a look at it. But this is absolutely true, what I just told you. Both those things. And both of them play a little bit of a factor in this video, so I had to bring them up first. But here goes the argument. From the flat Earth side, it says the world has to be flat because a trip across the Atlantic, say, that's easy in the Northern Hemisphere, closer to the center of the map. But as things go out, the water distance spreads, and therefore that's why you don't see flights between, and I'm going to say 2 specifically here because this was recently brought up in my life. This was Rio de Janeiro and Cape Town. And I say recently brought up because I've got a friend who happens to know that I am interested in flat Earth stuff, and he works at a gas station, and a guy actually came into his gas station just last week talking about the world being flat. And he said he wasn't trying to convince everyone. He just wanted to let them know what the truth was, and I appreciate that attitude. And he was talking about the shape of the world, and he said Rio de Janeiro and Cape Town, you can't get a direct flight between those 2 popular cities, the ones that come to mind right away in those 2 continents. And that's because there's people in the airlines, not necessarily everyone, but there's people in the airlines who know that the distance is too great for an airplane to cover. That's why you can't get them, and it's absolute proof that the world is flat. And he is absolutely right. You cannot get a plane ticket nonstop, commercial airlines, between Rio de Janeiro and Cape Town, Africa. Before I get into anything further down south, let's take a look at what it looks like in the north, and I hope you can see this. But I always chose nonstop flights. It's December 4th, 2018. If you want to go back and look at this, if we've passed that date, that's the year and that's the day. And from New York City to London, 6.5 hours. From London to Tokyo, that's almost 12 hours, 11 hours and 50 minutes. From Tokyo to Los Angeles, nonstop 10 hours. Los Angeles back around to New York City, 5 hours and 11 minutes. And if you've totaled all that up, I did it for you, but that comes to total time 33 hours, 26 minutes. And before taxes and baggage costs and everything like that, $25.68. In fact, I'd guess that if you had $3,000 on you in 2 days worth of time, you could replicate this trip and just carry your toothbrush and just hop from one flight to another. And you too could travel that. And there's no issues with this in the round Earth or the flat Earth models. So let's go on to some flights like Santiago, Chile to Sao Paulo, Brazil. Now I chose Sao Paulo, Brazil because it's actually the largest in Brazil, not Rio, and Sao Paulo is actually literally double the size. So let's be objectively honest here, and let's choose the largest city, and it's not Rio. That flight's 4 hours. So, as I said, you can't get one from Cape Town to Rio de Janeiro, but you can get a flight from Sao Paulo, Brazil to Johannesburg, which is also the largest city in South Africa, about double the size of Cape Town. Go ahead and look it up. That flight's 8 hours and 40 minutes. That's not all that bad. We saw longer in the northern hemisphere. Johannesburg to Sydney, that's another 11 hours and 45 minutes on Qantas nonstop. And finally, Sydney to Santiago, Chile, 12 hours and 20 minutes. That will be our longest leg of any of them, but not by too much. And so, in case you've been totaling it up, for over $4,200, you could take a trip that would be 36 hours and 45 minutes. And that was a very similar time on flights to what was done in the quote-unquote northern hemisphere, which we can't say quote-unquote anymore. We were pretty much objectively given here that this proves it, because the reason the cost is more is because of the bulk. Because if you're not running full plane loads all the time like you are in the northern hemisphere, because all these people have all this disposable wealth, then it still costs a certain amount for a plane to be able to get up in the air with a specific crew and have the maintenance done on it that it needs to, and to fly across large distances. It still costs that money, but if you don't have as many people paying for that trip to be able to pile them on and in place like sardines, as tends to happen with the Northern Hemisphere Airlines all the time, frequently, then you have to charge more. So that's where the economies of scale comes in. So the price difference makes sense, and the time is too similar. In fact, let's take a look on maps what this would look like. Now I'm choosing this version of the Flat Earth map because it's analogous to the UN logo or flag, which is what many people say is a smoking gun for why the world is actually flat. That they're just telling us in this. Why they would go ahead and tell us this is a discussion for another time. But anyway, and just so we know about the Mercator projection, if you take a round globe and if it's transparent and you shine a light through it and then you trace the outline of the continents, this is what you get. It's the Mercator map projection. But as light is going towards the ends, there is an extension and expansion. That's why Canada, although Canada is large, looks even larger than it does. Why Greenland looks to be almost sometimes the same size as Africa. There is an expansion effect that happens towards either pole of globe Earth, and it's just a stretching as you take a round object and try and smash it flat. Can't do it effectively. So here is the round Earth map that we're looking at, and here is the trip to the northern hemisphere. Tape measure, and this leg is just shy of 4 inches. Ditto for this leg, and they were about the same flight times. So this works out on a flat map. Here's what doesn't. Southern hemispherical travel from Santiago to Sao Paulo, Sao Paulo to Johannesburg, Johannesburg to Sydney, Sydney back to Santiago. Notice not only does this flight be so much longer than any of the flights in here, you'd be covering a lot of land. You'd be traveling straight over North America in order to do that. And I think somebody would have looked out the window and noticed by now, and that would have come up. But it never did. In fact, people would take that trip, talk about ice that they see out the window. You know, ice. So it'd be curving around way out here. So this is even a lie from what we know to be reality. But let's go ahead and tape measure this one. This leg is almost 10 inches long. This one is over 10 inches long. Remember, that was the longest flight. So if we measure the interior, we've got 3 3/4. We've got 3 3/4. 2 and 2 1/4. So 6 1/2, 7, 8 1/2, 9, 10, 11. 11 inches on this map drawn out, whereas this leg is 10. So one leg of the flight, and that would be directly over some land masses that would have been very recognizable. And we've already, so if you curve out at all, then the leg becomes longer. This is exploded. Now some people start to say, well, but what about tipping of the plane? airplanes, the curvature of the Earth, they should be constantly having to tip down, right? In fact, there was a guy who famously did this experiment. I'll show you. You've probably seen this. Okay? And he was looking at his spirit level and saying there was no tipping. Okay, couple of factors here. One, we wouldn't expect him to have tipping because of gravity. Gravity, if your plane is holding level, gravity is going to hold it at the same altitude over a curving surface. No need for the captain to tip it down, and the spirit level wouldn't see any effects because of gravity. But honestly, the spirit level wasn't the right tool anyway. Imagine you had a board, because generally spirit levels are used for carpentry purposes, measuring things being level for carpentry. If you had a board that was a mile long and it curved 8 inches along that entire mile, would you be able to detect that curve if it was gradually processed across the entire? No, the spirit level was not the right tool in the first place. You couldn't have possibly measured it, which you couldn't possibly measure with the spirit level the curvature of a board of 8 inches over a cross of a mile, up or down. You wouldn't be able to tell with the spirit level because it's not the right tool for the task. But gravity explains why the pilots don't have to tip down. They fly level. They don't apply more power, which is allowing them to generate more lift to resist the pull of gravity, which, by the way, there's also, then they get to a point where they can't no longer resist the effects of gravity because the wind, the air becomes so sparse that they don't generate as much lift as they did at lower altitudes. So this is why this was a bad experiment, but it is one that was famously performed, and some people think it's still relevant. I'm not sure why. Also, some people say, well, we don't see the atmosphere rushing around because you're saying the Earth is moving like this. Spinning around in a circle, and then spinning around this, and then traveling through the universe, and wouldn't the wind be rushing by at 1,000 miles an hour? You're confusing shearing forces. It would be true if it were shearing against something, but the Rounders model says that it's outer space out there. There's nothing to shear against. So, well, if it's outer space, why isn't it sucked away? Well, you're confusing what a vacuum is. Things don't rush into a vacuum. Air doesn't rush into a vacuum because it's being sucked in so much as it's trying to push in. The pressure on the outside is greater than the pressure on the inside of a vacuum, and so when the seal is breached, it's trying to rush in. But there's no rushing in effect on outer space because gravity is what's holding everything in place. And so, you know, a good representation of that would be if you're in a submarine and a breach gets in, the water's going to come pushing in and everything. That's because the water pressure on the outside of the hull is so much greater than the air pressure that's on the inside of the hull that it gets forced in if you got a breach in the hull of a submarine. People say, well, then if the wind isn't getting swirled around because of our spinning and everything like that, then why does Foucault's pendulum work? Well, first of all, you haven't explained to me in the flat Earth scenario why Foucault's pendulum even does work, but you're confusing rotational deflection of Foucault's pendulum with shearing forces. And it means you don't understand the concepts between the two, and you need to do more study because you didn't understand the concept in the first place. But ultimately, the round Earth map explains everything perfectly because flying from Los Angeles to New York is a little bit longer but similar from Santiago, Chile to Sao Paulo. And then spinning around here, New York to London, Sao Paulo to Johannesburg. And then at London over here, all the way over to this edge for Tokyo. Then we have from Johannesburg all the way over to Sydney. And then from Tokyo back around to Los Angeles, and from that Sydney back around to Santiago, Chile. The distances work here. They correspond with the flight times. And that means that not just a couple people in the southern hemispherical airline system have to know about it and be in on the lie and lying to you. You're talking about basically every pilot in the world who knows their planes can go so much faster than they actually do. The engineers who created the planes would have to know that. airline pilots open up the throttle a little bit when they're running behind schedule. You don't think that people in the northern hemisphere would have noticed their planes, the exact same planes that are being used in the southern hemisphere, can go 4 or 5 times faster than they're actually traveling? It doesn't make sense. This is case closed for the flat Earth model. And if you have any questions, let me know. But I hope this all made sense to you. And this is a common sense way, and it's one that can be tested. Yes, it'll set you back several grand, but you can take commercial airline flights from each of the locations that I listed, and you can circumnavigate the globe Earth. Hope the truth sets you free, guys, because that is what it will do. It'll set you free from the trap and the lie that is the flat Earth. This is Christian Truther, signing out.